First party out of the UK. Thank you, Paul, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Good evening.
Yeah, so the purpose of today, Paul, is to have a dialogue leader to leader about outstanding issues in the UK, Great Britain, and Canada. Also, look at the UK election. We have some issues with what's going on there, but it would be good to get your perspective. We're also really interested in hearing what's going on the ground in the UK and throughout Europe. And the overall purpose is to unite fellow patriots from different countries, and through working together, we all of us can get stronger and achieve our goals. Right, Paul?
Absolutely. And recently, over the last 6 months, we have the Britain First leadership team has been traveling to Europe, been traveling to Moscow. We've been speaking to a lot of different groups and patriots around the world because we are quite eager to share the skill sets that we've accumulated, over the years that have proved so successful. And we launched Britain First in 2011 now, and the reason primarily for our any successes we've had has been a combination of street activities and taking advantage of technology, social media, to bypass the stranglehold of the traditional mainstream media. And for a long, long time, it was very successful. I mean, we built up a social media base of 2.7 million people. I think it's probably the largest in Europe, definitely the largest in the UK by far in the political sphere. And we have accumulated a database. We've cut it back dramatically recently and got rid of a lot of dead wood. And we're now sitting with a database of 100,000 people
Mm-hmm.
around the world that has been accumulated through years of street activism and taking advantage of social media. And it's been very, very successful.
Yeah, wonderful. I was reading that Britain First has been shut down on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Is that correct?
That's correct. A
And
few years ago,
BitChute as well, right?
no, BitChute
BitChute
is
is still up.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
All
We
right.
we don't want to inaccurately smear them. They are a free speech
Okay.
platform, BitChute,
Wonderful. Wonderful.
100%,
All right.
and they allow freedom of speech. But several years ago, President Donald Trump retweeted several videos on Twitter, on our Twitter accounts, Britain First, and that set off a chain reaction whereby one by one all the big social networks started to close us down and started to censor us and cutting off hundreds and hundreds of thousands of our supporters that we built up relentlessly over the years. Started off with Twitter. Twitter closed us all down, and then YouTube didn't close us down until recently. But what they did is they implemented quite severe restrictions and warnings all over our videos. You couldn't share them.
Mm-hmm.
You had to click that you confirm that it might be what you're watching is extremist or dangerous material. And we were stitched up by the state last year in 2018, and basically we carried out a campaign in Kent, in southeast England, whereby a group of Afghan migrant paedophile gang rapists they subjected an English girl who's underage to a severe gang rape, which lasted a long time. And unbelievably, the judge gave them bail. So we thought we're not having this. These monsters have been allowed back, and there was no question mark over this. There was DNA evidence from several of them. It was, they were still given bail. They were allowed to come out and carry on running this kebab shop where the rape took place. And we thought, we can't have this. We're patriots. We love our people. We've got to warn the people where these monsters live. So went out and did some videos and gave out some leaflets, etc. And because we basically harassed this paedophile migrant immigrant gang, we were chucked in prison. And literally a few days into being thrown into prison for religious harassment, a few days in, I was sitting there in my prison cell and I was watching Prime Minister's Question, because in prison you'd watch anything just to stop the boredom from consuming you. And I was watching Theresa May when it was announced in Parliament that the Britain First Facebook pages were being closed down. That cut off 2.7 million of our supporters across three different pages. The biggest one being the Britain First page itself. They were all verified with a blue tick, and there was 2.7 million people on them in total. We was reaching millions of people every week. Soon after that, Tommy Robinson, who's quite a prominent activist, a counter-jihad activist over here, he got his Twitter taken down. I think there's 400,000 people on that. And then one by one, all across the West, and everyone in Britain started getting taken down, until everyone was wiped out. But Britain First was by far the largest. We had nearly 3 million on Facebook alone and several hundred thousand on Twitter. And Instagram and YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, they just started to wipe us out. So everyone kind of retreated, and now we're on this platform called Telegram, where you can have a channel. It's almost exactly the same as WhatsApp, but you're allowed to have a channel where you can subscribe to your favorite causes. And but the problem is it's not as widespread in Britain as it is in Russia and several other countries around the world. So it's quite difficult getting people on there. We built up something, near on 10,000 people on there. But, our email list has grown exponentially by about a third in the last 3-4 months. And I think this year so far, we've had about 60,000 shares from our website onto Facebook in total this year.
That's excellent.
So we're still reaching a huge number of people, but Britain First would be far in excess of where it is now. A lot of other people would be if it weren't for this catastrophic social media censorship, because that gave us the platform to bypass and sidestep the traditional mass media, and we was reaching millions of people. I remember at the heyday of the Britain First Facebook page, we was reaching something like 40 to 50 million people a week.
Wow.
That's not a total organic reach. That's a unique organic reach. That's 40 to 50 million individual accounts we were reaching. We worked this out that we was pretty much neck and neck with the BBC. So that's the power, just one Facebook page that we had. That's the power it wielded. And the British government just completely set out to sabotage all of this. And just recently there was a speech by Mark Zuckerberg. I cannot remember where it was, but we've put a note of it somewhere. He actually said in public that he'd been working with the UK government to close down pages that promote, quote, hate. And he'd actually said he'd been working with the government to get them closed down. So here you have the British government parading the world stage, talking about democracy and freedom of speech and all this, condemning countries like Russia and North Korea and all these other countries around the world, while internally and domestically, they're trying to silence those who are opposed, political dissidents who are opposed to the ruling orthodoxy.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. It's identical in Canada. The federal government is working with Facebook to shut down different pages, to shadow ban them, Paul. There's been a number of Facebook pages shut down. At the federal election this year, at the start of it, our page was put into silent mode. Through the entire election, my personal Facebook page was put into silent mode. I couldn't share or do anything on it.
The thing is, the establishments in the Western nations, which are overwhelmingly dominated at the political and media levels by the left, by the liberal left, they have panicked and they have thought, you know what, we're just going to lose control of the entire situation unless we censor social media. And I'm pretty sure behind the scenes, they've sat down with Facebook and said, look, unless you censor these people, you're going to face serious consequences. And Facebook have just taken a political decision, a business decision, and just said, look, the governments are just going to come down us like a ton of bricks. Yeah. Let's just silence.
Yeah.
Let's just cave.
But hold on a sec. The government in power when you were censored was the Conservative Party, right? Correct?
Yes.
So this liberal Labor, here it's liberal conservative. We view them as the same. They're just globalists.
That they are the same. It doesn't matter. Labor,
it doesn't matter who gets in.
There's in America you call it the deep state. Yeah.
The Conservative Party was censoring you.
Yes. In America you call it the deep state. In Britain we call it the establishment.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who actually.
Yeah.
They play musical chairs in Parliament all the time.
Yes.
And they but essentially we are a two-party state, Labour and Conservative, and essentially on the big issues, globalism, multiculturalism, mass
Yeah.
immigration, political correctness, they stand for the same things. They might argue and fuss and fight like cats and dogs and shout at each other in the House of Commons over the rate of VAT in the Outer Hebrides, but on the big issues,
Yeah.
they are the same.
It's
And
identical here.
yeah,
It's
and
identical.
what we've
Yeah. Go
sorry, I
ahead.
was
Go
just going
ahead.
to
Go ahead.
finish on that point by saying that the politics in Britain has shifted to the left. The Conservatives, which used to be or should be centre right, are now liberal. The Liberals in this
Yeah.
country are talking about tax the rich. They're now socialists. And the Labour Party in this country are now essentially communist. People like Jeremy Corbyn and all
Yeah.
that. And although that you've had the Brexit election and the recent general election, essentially politics overall has shifted to the left in this country.
Yeah.
And they all despise and hate and work around the clock to silence and censor and obstruct and sabotage anyone who is genuinely patriotic in this country.
It's the same here, Paul. It's identical. In Canada, we argue it started around in the early 1970s when the public lending right, the ability of the Bank of Canada to print the currency shifted to central banks. That's when everything changed. They also came up with the 1982 Charter, which enshrined multiculturalism and allowed people to come here and do whatever they want within the bounds of the laws, Paul. And it didn't matter from that whether who was in, liberal or conservative. They all have done the same thing. The mass immigration, they're selling out to the central banks. The debt is exploding in our country, Paul. I'm sure it's similar there. They never talk the real issues, ever.
No, the real
Paul.
issues are taboo. They're off limits. They're taboo. And anyone who dissents from the big issues, for the political orthodoxy of the liberal left in Canada, in America, in Britain, all across the West, you will face the wrath of the establishment.
Yes.
Look at Trump. I mean,
Yes.
the establishment, the deep state in America, spent years, millions of dollars, hundreds of people pulled in, subpoenaed over this Russia hoax.
Yeah.
Bang! It fell flat on its
Yeah.
face. As soon as that ended, shortly after, now there's an impeachment effort. The deep state is, whether the establishment in Britain, the deep state in America, it's all the same because the liberal left, they're desperate to stop patriotic movements like the Trump movement, like Britain First, like other things in Canada and in France with Marine Le Pen. Same problems, different countries. We're all part of the West. We're all of the same ancestry and culture and common civilization.
Yeah.
We face the same enemies trying to enforce and foist on us the same problems: radical Islam, mass immigration, political correctness, multiculturalism, all these things trying to dismantle nation states. They're trying to eradicate our individual identities, our ethnicities, our religions, everything. They're trying to eradicate the whole thing. This process is essentially communism. Because that's what all the things that are happening in the West now are what communism, was striving for the last 120 years.
Yeah.
Multiculturalism, globalism, internationalism, etc., etc.
We don't, at NCA, we don't get caught up in the left-right paradigm. We view that as a way to divide us. It's a basic division, political division. Paul, we think the root of this is a globalist agenda, which is tied to what's called the liberal international order, aka global world order. This is what's going on, in our view.
And this,
but they're using cultural Marxism, and Paul, you can argue that the end game, global world order, through these institutions like the UN, IMF, World Bank, World Trade Organization, that is a form of communism. Right?
Of course. And just after the Second World War, Clement Attlee stood up at the Labour Party conference and said, we need to basically give our loyalty to an international order over the interests of our own country. I think it was Roosevelt who drew up, this was back in the 30s, Roosevelt drew up plans for United Nations back in the 30s because he supported globalism and international government. You see it with the EU, and it's just a constant drive to try and remove sovereignty and democracy from
Yeah.
individual nation states
Yeah.
and peoples, and put it into the hands of supernatural uh, and institutions like the EU, the UN, the
Yeah.
IMF, and so on and so. It's all everything's becoming international. The latest example of this is the almost frenzied, uh, the absolutely crazy and frenzied push for climate change. Climate change is happening. It's happening very slowly. It's not man-made. It's been going on for tens of thousands, millions of years in this country, in this world. And back in the Roman times, there was the Roman times were considered a heat wave compared to now. And
Yeah.
then before that we
Yeah.
had an ice age. There's climate
Yeah.
change is cyclical, and it's not influenced by man. What's the end goal of this frenzy, this mania of climate change? Well, it's that basically all the countries of the world have to surrender control over their economies and the direction of their countries to international agreements. It's internationalism. It's globalism.
100%. Actually, Paul, and you may not know this, but it was actually a Canadian globalist operative that came up with the idea. He was the front person for this. Maurice Strong. He's on the Privy Council. He's deceased now, but he set up the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in the
Yeah.
early 90s, and that led to UN Agenda 21. And the purpose of the IPCC climate change agenda was to create an existential threat so great it would impose global world order. It would fear people into global world order, Paul. But it was a Canadian. Understand this, Canada, the crooked establishment in this country has gone all in on this globalism, all in.
Yes.
Louise Arbour, she was a Supreme Court judge in Canada. She was she was head of the International Criminal Court. She was the main person bringing the UN Migration Pact.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Canadians. I know there's a lot of British as well. But Canada, but isn't that disgusting? And this Maurice Strong was
Absolutely.
tied to the Rockefeller, to other globalists. Can you believe it?
The two things have really thrown a spanner into the campaign for globalism. First of all, the Trump phenomenon, because Obama was selling out the United States left, right, and center. He sold it out to Iran.
Yeah.
He sold it out to the UN Paris Agreement on climate change. He sold out America so many times. National debt doubled under Obama. He flatlined the economy. He was a socialist. He was, and he's still going on about climate change and so on and so forth. And in this country, it is just absolute non-stop climate change. And we've got, for example, we've just had a general election and the Labour Party has been crushed and their version of socialism has been crushed and it's suffered a real setback. John McDonnell, who is the shadow chancellor of the Exchequer, he was asked what he's going to do now. And he said, I'm going to devote myself almost entirely to the climate change crisis.
Oh,
We've had the Greta Thunberg phenomenon nonsense.
Yeah.
And it's just constant, one after the other. I think they're in Madrid over the last couple of weeks, plotting all kinds of internationalist, globalist nonsense. And Trump comes along and he just says, do you know what? I'm pulling my country out of this bullshit.
Yeah.
Pardon my French.
Yeah.
But I'm just pulling my country out of it. And unfortunately, the government in this country is firmly behind all this climate change nonsense. The British government even has a Department of Climate Change.
So does Canada.
But the idea is to tie us up into so many international agreements and accords and pacts that are legally binding all around the world, tie us up in so many of these that essentially our sovereignty means nothing.
Exactly.
Because we're always following international agreements that are set by supranational institutions like the UN, the EU, like you said, the IPCC there, the climate change body of the UN.
Yeah.
We've been caught lying and falsifying figures before. This is a scandal. This is This is an absolute scandal, an attempt by internationalists and globalists to try and usurp democracy and sovereignty. The EU was the project to consolidate all of European sovereignty in an unelected, undemocratic bureaucracy based in Brussels and Strasbourg. Britain has now rebelled against that. You've got the UN, you got all this climate change nonsense where the Paris Accord, they had 195 countries that all agreed to basically damage their own economies, to really cause major damage to their own economies. And you see, the left used to scare the world, used to crusade, and the big bogeyman used to be capitalism. We need world government. We need socialism on an international scale. All the countries of the world have got to become socialist, and we've got to have world government and globalism in order to defeat capitalism. Well, that has just completely been wiped out. That, it's discredited. So the new demigod of the political left, of the liberal left, is now climate change. And again, like you say, it's an existential threat that's been created in order to control and corral all the governments of the world into international agreements, giving more and more sovereignty and power to supranational institutions like the IPCC, the UN, the EU, and so on.
But these are globalists. These are globalists that are behind it. These establishments in the West are part of this globalist agenda, Paul. Right?
Absolutely.
So we're dealing with George Soros, Rothschilds, Rockefellers, Gates, on and on. Then the UN, IMF. These are all part of this globalist agenda, Paul.
Absolutely.
But Canada has a Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. The puppet Prime Minister Trudeau, and he's perfect for the establishment because he's not very bright, so he's easy to mold and told what to do, right? So he's just up on the stage. They all are, right? But he was saying that Canada's warming double than the rest of the world. Like, it was just complete fabrication.
Yes.
The models coming out of that ministry have been proven to be exaggerated to the extreme. Trying to push the case of the existential threat, Paul.
Look, we had the New York Congresswoman Cortez, I think, Alexandria Cortez, saying, listen, the world is going to end in 12 years. This was a few years ago. The world's going to end because of climate change in 12 years. We're going to get to 12 years. It's going to come and go. You see, what we had when we had the referendum on Brexit in 2016, we had something in this country called Project Fear. And there was an endless avalanche of lies and smears and scaremongering, left, right and centre, promoted and propagated and pushed by the mainstream media, saying that, we had some what are usually quite respected economic institutions making all of these predictions. And we had the referendum. And by the time that the whole world was supposed to have ended and we were all supposed to be living in mud huts in our gardens and civilization had collapsed, according to these people, Britain was booming. Britain was booming in every single way. Our economy's booming. I read today unemployment's at low levels. All of this Project Fear turned out to be nonsense. But you can see the same strategy, the same tactics with climate change. Let me just mute that. So we've got it in climate change, the scaremongering, the Project Fear. Everyone's, all these different countries around the world have got to surrender their sovereignty to these supranational institutions and agreements. And, by a British government in the future wouldn't be able to do, bugger all when it gets into office because and some of the things these people want, like Extinction Rebellion and the likes of Alexandria Cortez or whatever her name is, and Greta Thunberg, they want to completely deindustrialize the entire Western world. Mm-hmm. That would suit socialists down to the ground because they've been trying to clamp down on capitalism for over, since the Communist Manifesto was published back in 1848. So ever since then, they've been trying to defeat capitalism, defeat free enterprise. It failed with communism, socialism, but now they're trying with this climate change nonsense, and it is just another form of Project Fear that we had to put up with during the Brexit referendum.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah. There's a Canadian climatologist that has done excellent work on this, Dr. Tim Ball. He actually exposed the fraudulent hockey stick, it's called, where Al Gore was talking about the existential threat. It was going along and then boom. This was actually thrown out of court. He was charged for defamation. It was thrown out of court in British Columbia recently.
Yeah, was it Fahrenheit 9/11? Wasn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Al
yeah.
Gore's
There you go. But we're gonna have to clarify for the audience out here. Paul and I, and correct me if I'm wrong. We're not denying climate change. There's warm
No,
and cold cycles, natural cycles. But what we're challenging is this human-caused, so-called global warming, climate change. That is a hoax.
there is climate change. Like I said, if
Yes,
you go back a
yes,
couple of thousand years to the Roman
yes,
period,
yes,
it was a heat wave, and then thousands of years before that, we had the Ice Age. So
yes.
the Earth's climate does change, and it cycles.
But
Uh,
but that's the terrible thing with this, because what they're doing is they're taking a truth and mixing it with a false.
yes,
It's very clever on their part.
of
But when
course.
but when they first came out, they showed their hands because they called it global warming. But that didn't make sense, Paul. So they changed it to climate change.
Of course, because global warming. I remember back in the
Yeah,
70s, I read there was a big. I was born in 1982, so I wasn't around, but I remember reading that the big craze in the 70s was global cooling, and there was going to be another ice age
yeah,
unless we
yeah,
surrendered our
yeah.
sovereignties and deindustrialized. And then in the 80s, it switched to global warming, and then that was debunked. So now they're calling it climate change. But the whole thing reeks of a falsified existential threat
Yes,
to
yes, it
the
is.
world
A hundred
that
percent.
scaremongers us into submission, and that's what they're
Yeah,
after.
yeah, and it look it up. It started with Maurice Strong, Canadian. Can you believe it? A front person for the globalists was behind this.
Well, he can't be any worse than Trudeau. I mean, when Trudeau's not prancing around on gay pride parades, he's an embarrassment.
Well,
That
well, the
man.
thing is, what's going on? People, the way the establishment stays in power is they say, "Oh, we got to get rid of Trudeau. We got to get rid of so and so." It just perpetuates the status quo, Paul. Do you
Mm.
see that?
I
But
cannot believe he won the recent election in Canada. I was shocked. I thought he'd be kicked to the curb.
but
Most
but
most countries of the West are moving to the right. The Trump
yeah,
phenomenon, the Brexit phenomenon, the Boris Johnson phenomenon, the Marine Le Pen in
yeah,
France, and most
yeah.
countries in the West are moving to the right. And Canada seems to be the exception. You've got this liberal, effeminate clown as your leader, and it's just shocking.
But he's a globalist puppet. That's all he is.
Mm.
So a lot of these things are distractions, Paul. As you said at the beginning, the labor conservative, liberal conservative, on the big issues are identical.
Of course, if
Yeah, it doesn't matter then. So we argue it doesn't matter which one of them is in there because they're still going to be doing the big agenda.
there's systems of control that are
Yes.
used quite effectively to baffle people. One of the most prominent ones is between moderate and extreme, and who decides who's
Yeah.
moderate and who's
Exactly.
extreme? The mass media. So you've got moderate and extreme, you've got left and right, you've got all of these things. You've got the usual tactic of you deploying bogey words to scare people. Britain first is called racist. We're called
Yeah.
fascist. It's absolute crap. It's rubbish.
Same with us.
Um,
Same with us.
but these things are weapons. They're mind control weapons,
Yes.
and they are very effective when used on a mass scale. But the credibility and the trust in the mass media across the West has utterly collapsed, and Donald Trump deserves probably the lion's share of the credit for this when he's coined the term fake news, and he's pushing it so vigorously all the time. Fake news this,
Yeah.
fake news that, fake
Yeah.
news, fake news. Social media done a hell of a lot of damage because all of a sudden people were seeing videos of the migrant crisis. They were seeing videos that Britain First were putting out of these crazy bearded Islamists plotting death and destruction in London on the streets, and they were shouting "UK go to hell," and they were on the streets of London, and only
Yeah.
Britain First was opposing them. People were seeing this on social media for the first time and thinking, what the hell is going on?
Yeah.
Because you do not see that. There was such a
Yeah.
disparity and a difference between what you saw on the mainstream media and what you saw on social media, where it's organic and things are
Yeah.
shared based.
Yeah.
It's destroyed the credibility of the media across the West. And we just had the recent general election. There was a Remainer bias permeating the entire British media non-stop. Project Fear was in overdrive, talking about the world's going to end if we come out of the EU. Even still, 3 years after we voted in the biggest democratic exercise in British history to come out, they're still parroting the old nonsense for Remain.
So and
But
that was the Conservative Party, right?
But Boris Johnson he won the election by a landslide, and
Yes.
the difference between what you know the Corbyn the bias in favour of Corbyn and Remain and all of these left wing viewpoints and parties and individuals. You would have thought that this was going to be another hung parliament. Instead, the underdog who is getting ruthlessly demonised, attacked, and vilified all the time
Yeah.
came out on top in a landslide. And it's been a glorious week for anyone who's patriotic in Britain,
But
because
but it's still the mainstream party with the same overall agenda.
socialism is dead. Corbyn is dead in the water.
Yes.
Remain is
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah.
So in a limited number of ways, it's been such a glorious week
Yeah,
for
I
British.
understand. I understand. But the still overall agenda is going to go on.
Immigration is going to continue. Political
Yeah.
correctness will continue.
Yeah.
Appeasement of radical Islam will continue. Terror attacks will continue. Nothing real, substantial will change,
Of course.
except Brexit.
I'm
Except
not
Brexit.
we're not convinced of that. And we think it could be half baked. That they're already stringing people along, Paul, because he said the deadline was the end of January, and now he's waffling and say, "Well, we have to we need another 11 months to get a trade deal together."
That's what he's done. Actually, is quite encouraging, because there's two parts to Brexit. There's the
Okay,
withdrawal and there's the future relationship. And then the withdrawal agreement. We're going to come out of the EU now on the 31st of January. It's going to
officially.
happen. Officially, we're out on the 1st. But then we get a year after that to negotiate with the EU some kind of trade deal going forward.
So
Now,
what's
what's
going to
happened?
happen in the meantime?
What happens is just like what they call the transition period, and it's 1 year. And Boris Johnson has said he's going to write it into law in this country that it cannot be extended again after a year. And what's happened is, faced with this realization that Brexit is going to happen, and Boris Johnson is serious, and he's got a serious majority in Parliament to force it through now, the EU have caved in. So we was told before the election, a trade deal is going to take 7 years. The EU now is saying we want one rapidly, well before the end of the transition period. So the triumph on the narrow front of Brexit is
Right, right.
absolutely
Yeah,
unbelievable over
right,
the last
right.
week.
Okay, excellent, Paul. I'm glad to hear that, because it's hard to trust those mainstream parties, Paul.
Believe me, we don't trust Boris Johnson. This is a man who is notorious outside of Brexit as a social liberal. While he was mayor of London, he wanted an amnesty with citizenship for 500,000 illegal immigrants in London.
Wow.
He's not, by any stretch of the imagination, a patriot.
Yes.
And he is a liberal conservative, but he does have faith in the Brexit process. And on that narrow front,
Yes,
we
I
do
see.
support.
Okay, fair enough.
It's narrow front. It's not it's not a broad thing at all. On almost every other thing, life will continue as normal in this country. Radical Islam, tens of thousands of
Yeah,
Islamists will continue to roam
yeah,
the streets and flourish.
exactly.
Immigration will continue to make us
It could,
minorities in our towns
it could
and
be
cities.
worse. It could be worse.
Yeah,
No, but
but
there's a lot of deception, because it's saying, oh, we get to control our immigration, but what are you going to do? Same. Mass migration in. Right, Paul?
We've heard it before. We heard it in
I know.
1979. Margaret Thatcher had a landslide by saying, this country's being swamped, we need to sort it out. She had a landslide, she did bugger all. Then we had a few years ago, we had David Cameron, the Conservatives, saying we're going to bring mass immigration down to the tens of thousands. Didn't happen.
Yeah.
Total rubbish.
Yeah.
When they say they're going to control immigration, it's the opposite.
Yes.
We're going to have uncontrolled, open borders for as long as we have the two-party state of Labour and Conservative in this country.
Yeah. So I'm going to shift in a bit, but in Canada, I want to be very clear, Paul. Anyone who speaks publicly that is critical of immigration, you're going to be vilified. 100%. There was quite a famous hockey commentator, Don Cherry, and he made a comment recently about the lack of integration of newcomers. He was vilified in the media, the mainstream media, as racist, anti-immigrant, misogynist, and he lost his job.
Unbelievable.
And that sent shockwaves through Canada because a lot of people view him as a patriot, someone who loves his country. But so what they're doing, there's a form of tyranny in Canada, Paul. You're not allowed to talk about immigration. If you do, you will face the consequences.
Of course.
Yeah. I sent you the one example. I was at the Muslim Fest in Mississauga, Ontario. All I did was go up to that provincial elected official, and I said, the Muslim Brotherhood created Islamophobia in the 1990s to silence criticism. And his response to me was, I'm a racist. Right? So we got into a confrontation, and then I'm labeled racist.
It's a robotic response to anyone who challenges them.
But the mainstream media was all parroting the same thing. All this racist.
We're familiar with this in the UK. It's the same everywhere across Europe, North America. It's the same because the media and the political establishment are all in a death grip of the liberal left. And anyone who's brave enough to put their head above the parapet is relentlessly and ruthlessly targeted in this country. I mean, just to summarize the persecution I've suffered over the last 5 years, been arrested 16 times, been in 3 different prisons. We've had been living in probation hostels. It's been absolutely horrific. I've been attacked in my prison cell by a jihadi gang, big bearded jihadi gang, suffered injuries. Wow. And we've been subjected to probation orders, bail conditions. There have been 10 different prosecutions. I've got a criminal record now, about 5 different convictions, all political in nature. All of them, all political in nature. Some on laws that have been going back to 1936, Public Order Act.
But let's qualify this. It doesn't matter who's in power. Labor, Conservative. They're doing it to you, Paul. Right?
Of course, because behind the musical chairs act going on in Parliament, where they just swap Labour and Conservative keep swapping seats, and they just trade places every 5 years or every 10 years. We had 10 years of Labour, then we've got 10 years of Conservative, and we'll probably have it's just a two-party state. Behind that, you've got the establishment, which is SO15 Counter-Terrorism Command. You've got the Home Office, you've got MI5. I mean, just recently I travelled to Moscow to visit the Russian Parliament and to visit the headquarters of the second largest political party in Russia. And I also did several high-profile media appearances on TV, reached 60 million plus Russians. When I came back through Heathrow Airport, I was ambushed by a big growling mob of Britain's elite counter-terrorism police, who kept me in police custody for 24 hours. They arrested me. They interviewed me twice. They confiscated all of my electronic devices. And in the end, they released me. I still haven't been charged. I'm not even under investigation. I still haven't been charged. And I recently found out that particular part of the counter-terrorism legislation we have in this country was declared illegal by the European Court of Justice. So that's the reason they haven't prosecuted me yet. But they confiscated all my electronic devices, my hard drive, my mobile, my laptop. Luckily, I've got, military level encryption, multiple layers on all of my
Yeah.
devices. And we threatened them with the High Court in London, and they gave us it back a few days later, gave me all the devices back. But this is just a normal day in the office if you want to be a patriot leader in this country. And there's people in my organisation, in my party, that have been arrested, and we are treated like we're terrorists. The politically correct establishment tells the intelligence services to focus at least half of their resources on the far right, so that there's some kind of balance between Islamic extremism and the mythical far right. Now,
Yeah.
the far
Yeah.
right in this country, I think 2 or 3 people have died in the last, God knows how long. But you talk about over 100 due to Islamic terrorism and Islamic extremism. According to our intelligence services, 23,000 known Islamic extremists walk in the streets of Britain. It's flourishing. The recent London Bridge terror attack was carried out by an ex-terrorist who plotted to blow up the London Stock Exchange. He was released at half point through his sentence. What did he do? He came straight out and killed 2 people in a terrorist attack. Yet people like me are thrown in prison over and over again. We're thrown to the dogs. And it's not just me. There's people like Tommy Robinson. He's been absolutely dragged into the High Court. He's been to the Old Bailey
Yeah.
just for
Yeah.
filming on his phone outside
Yeah.
a court. It's shocking what's
It
going
is
on.
shocking. Yeah. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
yeah. We're dealing with similar stuff here, Paul. We we're we're trying to fight back. We have 9 human rights complaints in motion, which could lead to monetary compensation, and we're pursuing a constitutional case and maybe defamation cases, Paul. But it all takes time.
Yes.
But we are fighting back. It's very similar here. Uh, the problem with Canada is so spread out. We figure we're about 10 years behind you, Paul.
I would say so.
Yeah,
And every single day I'm reading news reports and YouTube videos
yeah,
from all around the West, everywhere.
yeah,
I would probably say you're about 10 to 15 years behind the UK. If you go to London now, the indigenous British people are a minority. I think we're going to be a minority in places like Leicester and Birmingham very, very soon. The demographic change in the UK is going to lead to the complete replacement of the British people in their own homeland.
yeah,
And
yeah.
like I said, mass immigration, open borders is just continuing unabated. It don't matter who's in power, Labour or Tory, because they're essentially on the big issues both the same.
Exactly,
Uh,
exactly.
and
It's important, Paul, to hammer that home because people get indoctrinated that there's a difference, right?
Well, on the main issues, we used to refer to them as Lib Lab Con, because you had Labour,
Yeah,
Conservatives, and then
yeah,
in reserve you had the Liberal
yeah,
Democrats in this. We
yes,
used to call them Lib Lab Con all the time.
yeah,
Now we just call them the old gang parties, the
yeah,
old gang
exactly.
parties.
But it's
Uh,
important to red pill peoples because a lot of citizenry are sucked up into that false dichotomy,
mm.
and that's
Of
why
course,
that's
and
why they vote the way they do. So we're always trying to educate people about that, and the way you're describing it behind the scenes was beautiful because that's what's going on. We have what's called a Privy Council. It's all liberals and conservatives on there. They're the shadow government of the federal government.
absolutely. And in this country, we generally summarise it by calling them the establishment. And they all
Right,
sing from the
right.
same hymn sheet. The trade unions, the media, politics, big business, the education system. It's so completely dominated by the liberal left, and it's just churning out generations of our people that are brainwashed, got no national identity, no
Yeah,
national pride, no
yeah,
recognition of their own traditions and culture and customs and so on. And that makes it incredibly difficult because if young people do not know what they're losing, then why should they put up a fight not to lose it? So we find ourselves in a position where we're fighting a cultural war as well as a political war. And it's
hmm
so difficult. It was a lot easier when we had social media. But since that's gone, it's incredibly difficult to reach the British people, to reach new people, to bring in new blood. It's incredibly difficult. But it is making the situation at the moment is making us dig deep into new technological methods.
yeah,
And like I say, our our email list, for example, has grown by a third in the last 5 months.
Okay.
And that is a tremendous new level of members, donors, activists, fundraising, campaigns potential. It is, if that continues, it's going to have a bigger, give us a year or two and we will be a mass movement. It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And we're learning
Excellent.
to do things because we've been censored on social media. We're being forced to dig deep and find
Yeah.
new ways and
Okay.
innovative ways to break out of this censorship that everyone's suffering with.
Yeah. Yeah. Fair enough. I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but I will bring it to your attention. The crony, I call them the crony Conservative Party in Canada. They're really the Globalist Party. If you look at the political history of what they've done, Paul, one of their official policy is called Kanzuk. It's beyond the EU zone, Paul. It's Britain, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and ultimately all 53 Commonwealth countries in a zone. Open borders, open trade. Be very careful of Boris Johnson, because that
Oh,
might be
absolutely.
that might be in his back pocket, which is worse than the EU zone. Kanzuk, go look it up. We have a beautiful video on it. But that's official policy of the Conservative Party in Canada.
The British people, politics is moving further to the left, but British people are moving further to the right. And you can see that with the EU referendum in 2016, where we voted for Brexit, and you've seen it ever since. The votes over and over again for Brexit. But if we go even further than that, in 2015, UKIP, which is a kind of quasi-patriotic nationalist, they had some anti-immigration, anti-EU agenda. They got 4 million votes in 2015, and then we had the EU referendum a year later, and something like nearly 20 million of us went out and voted to leave the EU. Then we had a general election shortly after that, and virtually all the main parties all stood on a platform and a manifesto and a promise to leave the EU and implement the referendum result. They won overwhelming numbers of seats in Parliament. And then we had after that the European elections, where the Brexit party, run by Nigel Farage, came out of nowhere and just won. They just completely won the whole election. Out of nowhere, just from a standing start, they won a national election. They beat the Conservatives, they beat Labour, they beat everyone.
That's but that's for the EU Parliament, right?
That was
Yes.
Yeah.
But
it just shows you that because if you went onto the BBC or ITV, if you went onto the Daily Mail, if you went onto the Sun, the Mirror, you went onto any branch of the media, you would think that this country is some kind of liberal socialist nation. But persistently, the votes keep telling a different picture. The grassroots votes keep telling a completely different picture. The British people are moving further to the right, but politics is moving further to the left. The establishment's moving further to the left.
Exactly.
We talk about media and the politicians, etc. Once the dust has settled on the Brexit issue, which it will do by the end of January, we'll be out. There'll be no going back. We're out of the EU. Politics will return to normal. Recent opinion polls for years now have said that immigration is the number one issue for the British people. And then we've got a problem as well for these endless terror attacks and the Islamic extremists flourishing in this country. Who represents the British people on those big, robust issues? There's no one except Britain First. Yeah. Now, we've been prohibited and sabotaged and blocked by the official government UK Electoral Commission from standing in elections for 2.5 years. The reason they don't want us standing in elections is because of that, because they know that we're sitting on a goldmine of potential national support. They're freaked out by the fact UKIP got 4 million votes. Then we left the vote to leave the EU. And the Brexit party won a national election. Now Boris Johnson swept to power with a huge majority. The voters seem to be going to the right. The Electoral Commission, which is stuffed full of liberals and Remainers and socialists, are terrified of this. So they've been desperately trying to stop Britain First from being registered as a political party and taking part in elections. Now, despite this, we contested the local elections back in May of this year. We only stood in 2 seats, and this was like a dipping our toes in the waters experiment. So we stood in a Labour seat in Birmingham. We stood in a Tory seat, a leafy kind of middle class Tory seat in Hertfordshire, just above London. In the Hertfordshire Tory seat, where we knew we wouldn't do well, we got 10% of the vote, which was double what the UKIP percentages were in the nearby seats. So we was thinking that is a really good result.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Birmingham, in a Labour seat, in a working class area, we got 30% of the vote from nowhere. Nearly
Wow.
30% of the vote,
Wow.
nearly one seat. And we beat the Conservatives, we beat the Greens, we beat all these other
Wow.
parties. Labour managed to just get in front of us by 150 votes or something like that.
Wow. Wow.
We was thinking, do you know what? If we could just get registered with the Electoral Commission, we could start contesting elections. We are gonna explode in this country, and the
Yeah.
establishment knows that. They
Yeah.
know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They can see the data. They can see the trends, the patterns.
Yeah.
They can see it.
Yeah.
They know
Yeah.
that we are sitting on a gold mine. And Britain First is the future of the right in this country. Because, like I said, the Conservatives support mass immigration. I don't care what comes out of their mouth. Talk's cheap. You judge people by their records and their
Yeah.
deeds.
Yeah.
And if you look at the Conservatives, consistently allowed mass immigration. Labour,
Yeah.
they're openly in support of mass immigration. Liberal Democrats, Greens, SNP, Plaid Cymru, all of the mainstream political parties, all of them are all pro-immigration. The Brexit Party, now that the Brexit issue is being, the sun setting on the Brexit issue, the Brexit Party is basically just going to dither and go
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And what does that leave? That leaves return to normal politics, immigration, crime, political correctness, the public services, all the big issues.
Yes.
And no one exists really that's in tune with the British people except Britain
Sure.
First.
Sure.
And that's why we're being stopped by the government itself from being registered as a political party. We've had to spend a lot of money to drag them into the High Court.
Wow.
And that's coming up in January.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And you're totally right on that. It's the same here in Canada. Unfortunately, it's all about misinformation, Paul, and spin. And there's a conservative operative, Fernando, here. He's working for a conservative lobby group. He was telling the Conservative Party here, just project yourself as a more popular party, right? So that's what they do. Um, they try and take some of what we're saying or what you're saying, and try and, you know what I mean, sugarcoat it. But
Absolutely.
it's all illusion, Paul.
Of course.
There's
The
you know what it's called? Fake populists, right? People are trying to jump on, but they're not real. They're not integral to it.
And
Right? Right?
we see this with the Conservatives in Britain all the time. They're
Yeah.
saying they want to control immigration. They want an
They're
Australian
lying. They're lying.
points. Of course they're lying. Just look at their track record. They're lying
Yeah.
through their teeth.
Yes, they are.
But I think the Brexit issue has so overshadowed politics in this country
Yes.
for so long.
Okay.
And I think that once we're out of the EU, I think that politics will return to normal and then Britain First day will come. Because
That's right.
UKIP in this country, the old UKIP party, has effectively just crumbled. The Brexit party is the Brexit party. And once that issue's
Yeah.
done,
Yeah.
dusted,
Yeah. I agree.
you know, they're going to become irrelevant.
Yeah.
And then what you're going to have is literally 5 or 6 mainstream parties that are all kind of liberal left, sort of soft and
Yeah.
politically correct and pro-immigration. And all Britain First has never gone down that road where we want to be soft and reach the highest number of people. No, we've done the other. We've been hardcore. We've been hardline. We've been militant. We've been in your face. We've been robust.
Yeah.
Because although that might not be super effective right now, in 5 to 8 years' time, 10 years' time, that is going to be exactly what the British people want. So we know we've pitched ourselves as militant British nationalists from the beginning. And although that might scare a lot of soft people off at the moment and restrict our growth at the moment, when things get really bad in this country, as they're going to over the next 10 years, people are going to think Britain First has been, robust and militant for so long. They're the people we can rely on
Yeah.
to be uncompromising for our people.
Yeah. 100%. And it's all about integrity, standing up for your values, your principles, not just spinning it and talking it, Paul. And that will show through. And those fake people will show their true colors.
Well, the thing is with Britain First, no one can deny that we aren't relentlessly active.
Yeah.
We've been a bit quiet last couple of weeks. We've been having
Yeah.
a bit of a slow
Sure.
slow down
Sure.
up to Christmas.
Oh, it's
A lot of
Christmas.
us need,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of us needed a break, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Same with
Uh,
us. Same with us.
but I came out of prison last year in the summer, and as soon as my license conditions ended, we have just held. We've just been relentlessly active. We've organised endless activities all around the country, days of action out on the streets, giving
Yeah.
speeches in town centres. We've held endless meetings, endless activities. No one else in this country is out on the streets like Britain First is. We
Yeah.
are relentlessly
Yeah.
active,
Yeah.
constantly.
Awesome.
That will never change. It's going to accelerate next year because we've gone on a huge recruitment drive amongst our support base, our email list. We're trying to build what we're calling the People's Army for 2020, and we are going to be out 3-4 times a week all next year. I'm actually reorganising using this Christmas period where it's light on activities to reorganise Britain First so that I can focus almost exclusively on generating publicity and being active, organising activities, organising meetings. We are going to be going back to, back in the 1930s Britain, where we had the soapbox politics. We held a day of action in a town called Rotherham in Yorkshire, which was famous for the grooming scandal a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
We held a day of action there recently, and we brought out a stage and a lectern and a PA system where we got up and I made a speech, and there was at least 100 locals watching. That's the kind of thing we are going to be hammering during 2020, as well as elections, as well as meetings, as well as just
Yeah.
leafleting sessions. We are going to be so active. We are going to take this country by storm next year. And hopefully by the end of January, we'll be registered as a political party again. We've got the local elections coming up in May. Hopefully, we're going to defeat the Electoral Commission. We're going to be registered as a political party, and we're going to start winning seats starting from next May.
Yeah.
That's our plan for next year.
Wonderful.
And it's
Wonderful,
really
Paul.
exciting.
Just so you know, Canada, there's a professor, Dr. Kaufman, out of University of London. He's projection for Canada based on the immigration coming in, the migration, that by 2100, Canada's traditional population, which is around 75% now of the total population, it will be decimated to 20% or less by
Of course.
2100. This year alone, they're very deceptive, these mainstream parties and the media, the fake media, Paul. They lie about the real numbers coming in, but through all streams, all migration streams, in Canada, there's almost 1,100,000 coming in a year.
Yeah.
If
And it's called the Great Replacement.
Yes, it is. And there's actually a program, I don't know if you're aware, for the UN Population Fund. It's called Migration Replacement.
Yes, and then you've got, on top of that, you've got the UN Migration Pact, which our treacherous former Prime Minister Theresa May signed us up for.
Conservative, right? A conservative.
A conservative. Well, she's not a conservative.
Yeah.
Like, she's a liberal. She's a liberal.
Yeah.
But everything about it just oozes liberalism and
But
softness.
just so you know, that Migration Pact is embedded in UN Agenda 2030. The Conservatives in Canada adopted it in 2015. This is the blue. These are the marching orders of the global world order. Look into it in the context of the UK. UN Agenda 2030. That is the. This is being implemented on all levels of government. UN Agenda 2030.
Absolutely.
And just so you know.
Yeah, I grew up in London. My parents were born and bred South Londoners. You know, my grandfather, who passed away recently, worked for the Richardson's crime family in South London, and they were born and bred in the inner city of South London. And when my mother fell pregnant with me, the area had just become a multicultural slum full of crime and problems. And she thought, we're moving out to the suburbs. The media call this process white flight, and you hear it on the news all the time. And I was born and bred in a town called Erith, right on the outskirts of southeast London. And when I grew up in an English area, but when I go back there now, the whole place resembles, parts of Africa. And it's just the same in Birmingham, the same in Luton, the same in everywhere around the country. Burnley, Bradford, Blackburn. It don't matter. Where you go in this country, you go to Glasgow, you go to anywhere, you can see mass immigration is going to replace the British people within this century as the overwhelming demographic majority.
Yeah, yeah. It's
And
same
the
with
political
Canada.
establishment, the
But
political establishment in this country are all united that that is going to happen. End of. No opposing it. If you oppose it, you're a fascist, you're a racist, you're a
yeah,
Nazi. If
exactly.
you oppose it,
Yeah,
you're going to be harassed by the police. If you
yeah,
oppose it, you're going to go to
yeah.
prison. And it's the
Yes,
great replacement. It's real and it's happening, and it's going
yes.
to lead to the extinction of our nations by the end of this century.
But that's part of global world order. They're opposed to the nation state, right? So Toronto, the largest populated city in Canada, is now a majority visible ethnic minority.
Mm.
And they're pushing, in Canada, it's called diversity is strength.
Ugh. We
Diversity
see
is
this,
our
yeah.
strength. So this is all
Uh,
going on in Canada. The difference, Paul, Britain is Britain geographically, the size is a lot smaller than Canada. So everything is spread out in Canada, so you don't see it as much.
and you can escape it as well. It's
Yes,
very. It's
yes.
the problem in Britain is we are a tiny island. We are the most densely populated country in Europe now, and we recently overtook the Netherlands, I believe, as the most densely populated country in Europe.
Oh yeah,
And this just, I mean, we've had Labour politicians saying we don't care if Britain's population goes 70, 80 million, and the birth rate amongst the indigenous British people has collapsed to catastrophically low levels. The birth rates amongst the Islamic and immigrant communities is still very, very, very high. Plus further mass immigration, we're going to be wiped out,
yeah.
bred out of existence, and
Exactly,
replaced in our own country. And
exactly.
that is going to happen, and that is the number one project of the Western establishments. And people like people who comprise Britain First, we've stood up against this much. We've had to sacrifice greatly under
Mm,
horrendous pressure and persecution um, over and over again, making a stand for our country. But we're not going to back down. We're not going to give in. We're not going to buckle. We are going to
yeah,
fight to the bitter end
yeah.
because you yourself and the population of Canada, you're all of British ancestry, and we are as a people and as a an ancient nation that now comprises Canada and Australia and New Zealand and huge parts of the United States as well. As an ancient nation, we have been we've been around for thousands of years. We are the results of 1,000 generations of our people, and the tumult and wars and struggles we've had to endure for freedom and for our existence, as millions of people have died, including Canadians and Australians, to
Hmm.
protect the motherland. And as an island people and island nation, we are never going to give up. We're going to fight for our country to the bitter end. This is just the beginning. What I always tell myself, although I've been through a hell of a lot, and it has been hard, we've been horrendously persecuted, even up until recently. And it's nothing compared to what's coming. And I always remind myself that it's nothing compared to what's coming, and it's nothing compared to what my great grandfather went through at the Battle of Dunkirk in 1940.
Yeah,
So just bear that in mind.
yeah,
What you're going through is
yeah,
hard, but it's nothing compared to what ancestors have been through, grandparents and great grandparents have been through, and it's nothing compared to what is coming in the future.
yeah,
So buckle in,
yeah,
suck it up, man up. This is going to be a long struggle, and the
yeah,
worst is yet to
yeah. 100%, Paul. Well, very well put. I just want to just make a side note here. I was very disappointed in Nigel Farage. He was publicly calling Tommy Robinson a racist.
Yes, and
Like what's wrong with Farage? Why would he make such such a politically correct attack on someone who's fighting for the British people on the ground?
Because again, outside of the one issue of Brexit, Nigel Farage is a liberal.
Yeah, he's a
Right.
liberal, eh? Right.
Yeah. If
Oh,
you
he is a liberal, eh?
yeah. If
Yeah.
you scrub Brexit, he's a liberal. I
Right.
remember when Donald Trump retweeted Britain First and it caused an international diplomatic
Yeah.
furore.
Yeah.
I remember Nigel Farage, who's very upset because he likes to think of himself as Trump's man in Britain, and he's the one who's got the access to Trump, etc.,
Yeah. Yeah.
etc.
Right.
So when
Right.
Trump retweeted us, he turned around and he runs this radio show on LBC, which is quite big, and it's all about political
Mm-hmm.
discussion. And he does a popular show on there, and he called Britain First, quote, neo-fascist. And I was driving at the time, and I went absolutely ballistic. And I rang this LBC show up, and I said to the producer, the person who owned the phone, I said, listen, I'm Paul Golding, leader of Britain First. Nigel Farage has just called us neo-fascist on your show. I want to confront him about this claim. They said, okay, we'll ring you back in 5 minutes. They never rang back.
Yeah.
They would have put it to Nigel. We've got Paul Golding on the line. He would have said, oh, no, no, don't want to speak to him. He is a gutless liberal
Yeah.
outside of
Pathetic.
the issue of Brexit.
Pathetic.
And again, a bit later on, when Tommy Robinson struck up a friendship with Gerard Batten, who's the interim leader of
Mm-hmm.
UKIP after Farage stood down, he used the same left-wing liberal terms of racist and extremist against Tommy Robinson. He did it with Britain First. Outside of Brexit, he's a liberal. I remember going to
Right.
election
Right.
campaigns in
Right.
Rochester, London, when I
Mm-hmm.
stood for London Mayor, got
Yeah.
100,000 votes against Sadiq Khan. I remember I've met Nigel Farage loads of times, and we always walk past each other, and we give ourselves a little look out the corner of the eye. And I went, "All right, Nigel." And the vast majority of UKIP foot soldiers back in years ago, they absolutely love Britain First. They think that we're heroic,
Yeah.
brave, taking the fight to Islamic extremists. Recently, I held a day of action in Burnley, and there was a Brexit party stall there. And again, every single one of them, without dissent, was amazingly pro Britain First. But Nigel Farage always plays the political game. He's in with the
Yeah.
media.
Yeah.
He's in with the
Yeah.
establishment.
Yeah.
He doesn't mind calling people like me or Tommy Robinson fascists or racists, etc. But outside of Brexit, he's a sopping wet liberal idiot,
Yeah.
in my
It's
opinion.
pathetic. So he's caving into the mainstream fake media.
He's a lifelong crusader against the European Union. He doesn't care
Yeah.
about anything.
I
And
know.
when he does
That's
other
pathetic.
stuff, he's
That's
liberal.
pathetic. That's pathetic. Yeah, I was very disappointed with his public remarks, and I've seen through Johnson. He's trying to play the Islamic card. He doesn't even know what he's talking about, Paul. He started saying Islamophobia is somehow justified, but that doesn't
The,
make sense, Paul. Islamophobia was created by the Muslim Brotherhood to silence criticism of Islam.
the problem with Boris Johnson is that the
But
problem with all conservatives is
he's
they've got no
pretending.
backbone.
No, but he's pretending to be someone who he's not.
Well, the problem is the Labour Party in this country has widespread grassroots rank and file
Yeah.
problem with anti-Semitism, which permeates their entire
Wow.
party. Okay, they're under
Wow.
investigation by the Equalities Watchdog in Britain. Okay, their reaction to that is, "Oh, what about the tiny, tiny speck, a blip of Islamophobia in the Conservative Party?" And typical spineless, weak Conservatives say, "Oh, we'll hold an internal inquiry into Islamophobia." It's nonsense. You're talking
Yeah.
about probably one tweet and Boris Johnson himself referring to Muslim women who wear niqabs and burqas as letterboxes. For
Yeah.
Christ's sake, they do look like
But it
letterboxes.
doesn't
It's
matter.
about
No, but
medieval.
I don't really care what he's saying there. But what's the policy? What's he going to do about it?
Nothing. He won't do anything
I'll tell
about
you
nothing.
what we're going to do about it. We want to ban the practice of political Islam in Canada to start.
Well,
That's
Britain First has said publicly so many times, if we was in government, we would crush, and I mean crush,
yeah.
radical Islam,
Well,
extremists,
well, we don't. Well,
terrorism. It would evaporate because
we
we would
don't.
just crush.
But we don't support any radical extremists. But Paul, remember, these Islamists are coming in thanks to these mainstream parties. That's the root.
Of
right?
course,
Remember
nothing's going
that,
to change in Britain. People
right?
are thinking, oh,
Right?
we've got this.
Right? But no,
Nothing's
but
going to change for Boris Johnson.
it's because of these mainstream parties that they're in the country. Period.
You know, at the end of the day, I completely agree and concur with what
Yeah,
you're saying. The Conservative and Labour, by their deeds, not their words,
yeah,
by their
yeah,
deeds, they have consistently, in practice, been pro open borders,
yeah.
uncontrolled mass immigration.
100%.
That's a fact.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Look, yeah,
the only people on the political spectrum at the moment that are opposed genuinely to mass immigration is Britain First.
yeah, yeah. Just be careful, Paul, going forward. A fake populist, fake nationalist.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
mean,
because if they see you, let's say the Conservative Party there sees you doing really well, they start to do all their poll surveys. You know, they may skim off some of your stuff because we've had that happen to us.
well, Margaret Thatcher did it in 1979. Back then, I think it was the National Front were gaining massive popularity, and Margaret Thatcher came along and said, "The country's being swamped. We are going to sort it out." She won by a landslide. And the Conservatives are experts in pretending to be patriots, pretending to be against immigration, pretending to wave the
Yeah,
Union Jack.
yeah, yeah. You
But
see,
like
you
I said,
see.
you just examine their record in government.
Yeah,
They are left wing, they are liberal, they are
globalist,
soft
globalist, right?
globalist. Absolutely.
Globalist, and it's the same here. You know, there's a myth in Canadian society that the Conservative Party's fiscally responsible, Paul. But if you
Yeah.
look at the history, they're the least fiscally responsible.
Yeah.
So this is all marketing spin.
Of course.
You
And
see it.
the Conservative Party are experts in stealing the thunder of the genuine right.
You
And this,
see?
a lot of the time, I actually have got more respect for people, even people like Jeremy Corbyn, because
Yeah.
at least Corbyn is honest.
Oh,
He,
hold on a
what?
sec. Hold on a sec. That's exactly what we say in Canada. At least Trudeau and the Liberals are honest. They talk
Yeah,
about replacement. They talk about post-national state. The Conservatives are sneaky and deceptive. They're not honest about their agenda.
yeah.
You see?
And we get the same in this country.
Yeah.
Corbyn and his ilk and the Liberal Democrats and everyone else on the left, they'll stump up and say, we're pro-immigration, we're pro-EU,
Yeah.
they support political correctness.
Yeah.
They're open about it. The Conservatives support all of that,
Yeah.
but they pretend
It's
to be right-wing. They pretend to be
exactly the
patriotic.
same here. And that's the reason we think they're worse.
That, of course.
That's why we think they're worse.
They're a more insidious problem because they masquerade as
Something they're not.
exactly. That's it.
Yeah,
And
that's exactly what's going on here. So we're always trying to re-educate people, deprogram them, give them the facts.
yes,
Because Canadians, there's a certain percentage that are sheep who are programmed, and all they can think is liberal conservative,
yes, absolutely.
right? So, do you have any closing remarks, Paul?
I hope to visit Canada soon, and I hope I'd invite you right now. Invite you over to the UK. When you arrive, we'll give you a tour of London,
Yeah.
and we'll show you all the sites.
Sure.
We'll take you down the East
Sure.
End, and we'll show you what's happening in our capital city. If you've
Yeah.
got any plans to go over to England in the future, into Britain, we would happily receive you. And
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, because we want to educate Canadians about what's going on. So we talk about UK, we talk about the Sharia courts, we talk about the grooming gangs, we talk about the enclaves, the no-go zones. But there's nothing like reality on the ground, Paul. So I will take you up on that, and vice versa.
Absolutely.
I'd be happy to show you around here. It is a bigger country, so there'll be more than one flight involved to get around, right? But
of course.
so let's stay in touch. It sounds like we're fighting the same beast.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Look, I consider Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and everyone in America of British descent to be as much my own flesh and blood as people still in the UK.
Yeah.
because we are essentially, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand were all created by the British people,
Yeah.
and we share the same monarchy still. We share the same systems of government, and historically, we are the same nation. Canada, Australia, the UK,
Exactly.
and we are the same nation across the seas.
And people have to realize that there's nothing wrong with standing up for your identity, your heritage, your cultural norms, your way of life, who you are as a people. There's nothing wrong
Absolutely.
with that. The
No.
mainstream media is going to tell you that that's racist, but it's not.
In fact, I say it in speeches all the time at Britain First meetings. What we want
Mm-hmm.
is normal. What we want is the norm all over the world. Because if you go to Japan,
Yes.
you go to China, you go to India, you go to all these countries that are unpolluted by political correctness, they have what we want. And one of the things I love about traveling to Russia is seeing that strong patriotic
Oh,
state where they're so patriotic. They love their motherland, they love Mother Russia,
yeah.
and they respect their war veterans to such a great degree. I mean, it's the patriotism and the tradition
Yeah.
and the sense of nationhood in Russia is makes me envious. And I'm thinking, why can't we have
Wow.
that in the West? But that's
Yeah.
what we represent.
Yeah. Exactly. We actually, it's kind of coincidental. We did a study comparing certain economic parameters between Canada and Russia. They're two countries heading in opposite directions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and we look up to their, because they're a strong nation state. They believe they have their immigration policy mirrors NCA exactly, right down to the numbers.
Yes. And
If
the thing
hold
is,
on
if
a
you
sec, I'll give you a number here. Right now, Russia's bringing in this. This is a high for them. They're bringing about 185,000 migrants in this year, Paul. They're all Russian speaking. They're all Russian ethnics. Okay?
yeah,
Canada is bringing over 1 million in. If you work out the difference in population size, if Russia were to adopt Canada's immigration policy, they would have to bring in close to 5 million in.
yeah,
That's how
proportionally.
bad it is. That's how bad it is.
Well, of course, I mean, forgetting Putin and his politics and any crimes he may have committed, but when you focus purely on the Russian nation
Yeah.
itself, there's so much to be desired.
Yes, there is.
Um, and regardless of Putin, the Russian nation itself is a strong, independent nation state
Yes.
that is full of pride and nationhood
Yeah.
and tradition.
Yeah.
And it does make you envious when you're
Yeah.
living in a third world toilet like London.
Yeah.
It does make you,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
you walk around Moscow for 2 days and not find a fag butt on the floor. They
Right.
take such pride in their country.
Yes.
You walk around London, it's just a third world city.
Yes, it is.
It's an
Same with Canada. Canada is turning into a third world state.
yeah,
Look at Toronto. There's crime every day now. There's 1 million dependent on food banks every year.
yeah,
1 million.
yeah. Same different countries, same problems.
There's no go
Canada,
zones now, and there's no go zones in Canada. I've gone into enclaves, Paul, and you wouldn't believe the vicious attacks on us. They told us to leave, go back to Britain, go back to Iceland, go
yeah.
right.
Well, we're
These are
familiar with that in
migrants,
the UK. Britain First is familiar with that. We go into no zone. We specialise in going into no-go
but
zones.
but But the important point too, Paul, is it's not about these migrants because I've traveled around the world. I love different cultures, but I love my own, and I believe in protecting, preserving it.
Of
Paul,
course, and
yeah.
when you
So this
mention
isn't about racism at all. This is who we
no,
are.
essentially,
Yeah,
our nationalism is internationalist in outlook because we want to preserve our nation. We want to preserve our traditions and our culture and our heritage, and we can appreciate that
yeah,
when we see it in other races, other continents. We
yes,
can appreciate. I've got far more in common with a Japanese or an African patriot than I have with these treacherous white liberals who
yeah,
infest the Western
yeah,
establishments.
yes,
Far more in common
yeah,
with them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But don't forget about the globalists in the background because they are there. They're the real monster.
Of course.
Yeah,
But
and
like I say, it's been an absolute pleasure being on
all
the
right.
show
Thank you,
tonight.
Paul.
And
Thank you.
God bless to everyone
Yeah,
who's watching in Canada. And I hope to see you all
yeah,
soon.
yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Um, Happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you and your family, Paul, and Happy New Year. And I look forward to contacting you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
God
Thank you
bless.
very much. God bless you.
Thank you.